Hello and welcome to Leading on Logistics, the executive membership podcast from Logistics UK. Mike Young back with you as we bring you insight into and analysis of the country's logistics sector. In this latest instalment, we'll be focusing on one of the biggest global stories of the year, trade and tariffs. The true complexity of global supply chains has certainly been in full focus as the Trump White House has taken us all on his tariff rollercoaster. Straight to our guests we go then, who've co-written an article focusing on exactly this subject, calling it Global Trade in the Balance. Nichola Mallon is Logistics UK's Head of Trade Policy, and Antonella Teodoro is a Senior Transport Consultant at the Transport Economists MDS Transmodal. And Nichola, just to start us off, how did you come to write this article? And I'm going to be counting how many words you utter before I hear the name Donald Trump.
Well, I suppose many of our members trade internationally, Mike, and trade normally can be quite boring and technical. And that's actually the conditions within which trade thrives. It likes stability, it likes certainty, it likes rules, it likes order. And of course, if you're looking at the international trading picture at present, it's more like a roller coaster. Shippers literally are blindfolded. We don't know where the next twist and turn is coming from, though it can be daily. And we have no idea where it's all going to end up or when this roller coaster is going to stop. So with all of that uncertainty, we thought it would be a good idea to put pen to paper to try to capture things as they stood at that moment in time, because it is constantly changing, to help our members try to understand and try to help them navigate these very difficult and uncertain times.
And Antonella, you say in this article, the only certainty is uncertainty right now. I mean, can you remember volatility in global trade quite like this?
That's a very good question. I think that, yes, we have kind of learned how to manage uncertainty with the COVID. And I think that actually that is a good link with the tariff. We have learned Trump saying expression like tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary or the Liberation Day. These are definitely striking expressions that capture more than just a political rhetoric. I think they reveal a profound sense of economic frustration in many Americans, and that was the feeling that I think was emerging during the COVID. And the link between the two is the uncertainty, the fact that at the time we were starting understanding how fragile global supply chain had become, how dependent we have become on a distance producer, particularly on China. So what is linking the feeling that we had there and the uncertainty that we're facing there with now is that globalization is changing. And what I think with this most beautiful word in the dictionary, Trump is trying to do is trying to give back to American workforces and some communities that feel left behind by the globalization a sense of hope. And that is the uncertainty. Is tariff the answer? I don't have the answer to this question, but I think that that is the link. So to answer your question, if there is something similar in terms of uncertainty, I think that is during COVID.
Comparable with a global pandemic. My goodness, 5 years on, we're in an economic pandemic then. The president's plan, where countries face tariffs on goods brought into the US, announced in April. Some of these tariffs were 100% plus, but the majority of the tariffs are actually on pause by Trump for 90 days in the wake of stock market volatility. Now, just a few days ago, at the start of June, the US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said Donald Trump is not planning to extend that pause to his tariffs. What do you make of that? I put that to you, Nichola, first. Of course, I should say that even in the last few days, the Court of International Trade in the US has ruled that the president doesn't actually have the authority to impose tariffs on nearly every country in the world, and the White House is appealing against that ruling. But let us just say that for some reason the appeal is successful by the White House. Tariffs could return after this 90-day period.
They could. And even when it comes to the whole legal picture, it is just one chaotic development after another. when the US Court of International Trade ruled that the president had overreached his power in respect of the country specific tariffs, I know that was a welcome sense of relief for UK shippers. But of course, as you say, that has been appealed. And while the legal process plays out, the tariffs are still in play. And we are all looking to the 9th of July when the 90-day pause ends. Of course, for shippers, the uncertainty is hugely problematic. I know that our members are scrutinizing their supply chains. They're looking to see how their cash flows will be impacted. They're looking at their inventory strategies. They're looking at a number of tools that they have within their armory. But it is hugely concerning that we could say dramatic increases in country specific tariffs come the 9th of July. And ultimately, costs feed their way down into the consumers. I agree with Antonella. Part of, I think, President Trump's rationale, if we can try to put ourselves inside his mind, which is, not an easy thing to do, but it is about, as he sees it, rebalancing trade in goods. It is about trying to increase domestic production and manufacturing, which takes a long time. And of course, it's also about kind of trying to isolate China and reduce China's trading power and its shipbuilding power as well. But ultimately, when prices rise, consumers pick up the tab, most likely, and the US consumer will feel the pain of this at some stage. And it's how the president tries to spin that or how he tries to respond to that.
Antonella, economic historians might argue the case for tariffs in a very short-term way, but then things start to unravel and that impact on the consumer starts to click in more and more heavily. In the short term, Trump could return to tariffs and actually score some points potentially.
Scores points in the sense of sustaining his argument. Yes, it does, in the sense that it can create that sense, again, back to the sense of hope and then sense of be back on what it is that you can produce internally. However, as Nichola was saying, putting in place infrastructure and bringing back manufacturing takes time. And the hope that will kind of, people will start realizing that the first thing that you see, it is the price at the retailer, so the price that you pay for actually everything that are imported, because the 10% might sound not much, but if you have that percent increase in pretty much every consumer goods you are buying from abroad, that will reduce your sense of your disposable income. And that is something that, of course, will then define how tariffs are working and even the pressure that actually that's putting on inflations and on the Fed on how to manage the interest rate. So I think that this will emerge with the price at the supermarkets.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. Let's just focus on the UK in all of this. The UK and the US have now reached this deal over tariffs on some goods traded. President Donald Trump's blanket 10% tariffs on imports from countries around the world still applies to most UK goods entering the US, but the deal has reduced or removed tariffs on some of the UK's exports. So that's cars, steel, aluminium. Nichola, what impact has that had that you're hearing?
So, Mike, it is that announcement of the trade deal between the UK and the US is welcomed. I mean, the situation has deteriorated further in respect of steel and aluminium. There's now a 50% tariff on that. The UK is still paying 25%. Yes, you're absolutely right. Under the new deal, that is to reduce down to 10%. But of course, that deal hasn't been enacted yet. So it is progress in terms of potentially moving in the right direction. But for UK shippers, they're still operating under that 25% tariff for steel and aluminium, the 25% tariff for cars, because the reduction has yet to kick in. And I think that's the important thing to remember. With the president, there's a lot of bluff and there's bluster, and it's always important to differentiate between what he is saying and what is actually happening, the action that is taking place. And I think it's important to always try to monitor that and get to the nub of what has actually changed rather than what the president says is changing.
What are Logistics UK members telling you in terms of their responses? We hear about a pause on shipments, a bit of a wait and see policy from many Logistics UK members, I would have thought.
Yes, there's a bit of a mixed bag, Mike. So we have some who, when the tariffs were announced, kind of went into a wait and see to see how all this would transpire. We certainly know that now that we have the 90-day pause, a number of shippers are front loading. So imports into the US have increased. It's important to remember that as well as the impact of tariffs on consumers, it is having a stop, start, go, hold back repercussions for shippers. So when the tariffs was announced, there was certainly a fall in imports to the US as shippers kind of waited to see how this would play out. But we're certainly picking up that as we're getting closer to the end of the 90-day pause period, shippers are front loading and trying to move as much product as they can into the United States because if deals aren't struck, then we will see that reversion to the reciprocal additional tariffs, which for some countries are really, really large.
It dazzles me how shippers are having to adapt here, whether it's rerouting shipments, whether it's front loading, as you say, changing the timings of deliveries. It's a staggering global response that's having to be put into place by shippers.
It is, and there's still much more to come because, as Antonella will know, we, yes, have the tariff situation, which the media, mainstream media is focused on, but there are big implications coming for shipping lines and for shippers from the 14th of October, when we will start to see the phased implementation of fees on Chinese owned, built, and operated vessels. And the Chinese dominate the shipbuilding market. So they will have consequences for shippers and will ultimately have consequences for consumers as well, as it becomes much more costly to move goods.
Antonella, I'm fascinated to weave you in here, just to summarise that challenge that Nichola is talking about, away from tariffs. These service fees on Chinese-built vessels calling at US ports, designed to tackle the dominance of Chinese shipbuilding, but these fees will be rising over 3 years, affecting any operator using a Chinese-built ship, and there are plenty of them. I mean, these higher freight charges are piling pain upon pain.
Yes, they are. And in fact, the most difficult position to be is when you don't have, when you are a price taker. So, as Nicola was saying, the tariffs and the US port fees are an example of tariffs. Fundamentally, they increase the price. They will go down to the consumer, and the difficulty is there in the port fees is understanding how shipping lines are deploying their vessels, because that's right, this is on vessels, on Chinese vessels. And there will be shipping lines that are better equipped to move vessels around. To other terms, substitute a vessel, a Chinese vessel, with another vessel that is not a Chinese one, so it will not incur the cost. But there will be shipping lines that are only with the Chinese vessel on their disposal. So we'll have less maneuver, less room for maneuver, and they will not have the room to escape, how to reduce the cost. So will not have any other choice but increase the surcharges. So they will go down again on shippers and then eventually on consumers. So what it seems to be emerging here is really an importance of monitoring the situation, evolving situation, and understanding even how your counterpart is responding to this measure. What sort of action either the shipping lines or your other, like on the retailer, how they are absorbing the cost. There will be, of course, shippers and retailers that will have maneuver to absorb the hiking price. There will be others that will not have a choice but pass on, because 20%, 10, even 10%, it's a big margin. So it is quite, high.
These service fees on Chinese-built vessels, it emphasises to me really just how much that, whether we talk about global tariffs, this really feels in many ways like a trade war between the US and China. Would you agree with that, Nichola?
Yes, I think very much so. And I think it's also important to note that, the tensions between these two big superpowers has been going on for quite some time. So if you chart Obama and Biden, there were efforts to reduce China's trading power. But since the president Trump has come along, he has just got a loudspeaker, an amplifier, and he's really going to town in all of this. And we have seen a de-escalation in the tariff war between China and the US for this 90-day period as well, and that's welcome. But I think if you look at any of the trade deals that President Trump is trying to negotiate with countries, Part of it, yes, is about rebalancing the trade deficit between that country and the US as the president sees it. But it's also about other countries picking a side and standing with the US as opposed to China. And that presents real challenges for like the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who, while he's trying to negotiate a trade deal with the US, is also trying to have trade talks with China and at the same time also engage in this reset of trading relationships with the EU. So it shows how all of these things are interconnected and all of these dynamics have consequences and reactionary consequences. So it really is a very complicated picture.
Antonella, would you concur? In some ways, I think the world is waking up, the wider population is waking up to the impacts of the US economically and China economically, the two great powerhouses economically, arguably.
Indeed, and in fact, we should mention that today in London, the two superpowers are starting the discussion again. So they are meeting, trying to find a solution. And of course, it will be naive to think that there will be a trade deal coming out of these few days of discussion. However, I believe this is to be considered a good sign. However, they are talking again, they're trying to find a solution. And another consideration to make here when we talk about tariffs is that other countries, in this case China, they might use other tools that is not necessarily tariffs. In the case of China, they have been using the rare materials as a tool. So you enter in the negotiation thinking that I have the tariffs, I will impose tariffs on you if you don't trade on our conditions. However, the counterpart might have other cards on their disposal, and the rare material, it is an important one. And so these negotiations are complicated, are complex, and it is a high-stake move what Trump is doing, because I think that ultimately what is at stake here, it is not just about what to expect in July or where the new tariffs will be announced and then will be posed. It is the long-term trust. And that is the fundamental when we talk about globalization, the way we related to each other.
Now, long before US tariffs were dominating the headlines, Brexit certainly created plenty of waves for the UK. Let's talk about the UK and Europe and this reset deal of late May, the UK and the EU reaching a new agreement setting out post-Brexit relations on areas including fishing rights, trade, defence. Nichola, what impact is that having for UK-EU trade going forward, do you think?
Well, look, Logistics UK very much welcomed the summit and the publication of the Common Understanding document. And it is, again, it's movement in the right direction, but it's very much like the UK-US trade deal. It's a heads-of agreement at this stage. So yes, there is a very welcomed commitment to work towards an SPS agreement. So basically, that would reduce and remove a lot of the cost, friction, delay, and wastage of agri-food products and plant product trade between GB and the EU. So we very much welcome that. There was also a commitment from that summit to link the UK and the EU emissions trading schemes. Yes, there's a lot of challenges in achieving that, but it would help to stabilise prices. It would help to reduce the cost of the path to net zero. But we really need to see timelines, Mike, and we've been engaging with government before the summit and since, and we're saying we need to see timelines. Businesses need to understand timelines for implementation, and we want to see an accelerated implementation of these new agreements, but it needs to be done with meaningful engagement with business, because one of the lessons from Brexit is that policymakers with the best will in the world in government offices, devising policy, not road testing it in the real world with businesses, causes pain for everyone. So, we'll continue to make that case to government. But yes, we welcome the summit. We welcome this ongoing reset of trading relations. And really, we're calling on both the UK and the EU to be really ambitious in terms of this ongoing reset. But also, there's an upcoming review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and we want to see ambition there too.
And it's quite dazzling when you think that the complexities of the Windsor framework, the EU, any retaliation it makes against US tariffs, has an impact on the UK, particularly Northern Ireland, which continues to be a part of the EU single market. Nichola, I know you're very much expert on this, but even you must scratch your head occasionally when you kind of see this level of complexity.
I mean, it is hugely complicated. And as I say, we welcome that reset. We welcome that commitment to an SPS agreement. But of course, businesses who are sending goods from GB to Northern Ireland are going to face huge costs from the 1st of July because there's this thing called phase three, not for EU labelling. Basically, you have to put labels on thousands and thousands and thousands of products for that to then to subsequently become redundant when the new SPS agreement is in place. So there is a lot of frustration on those traders and logistics operators who are moving goods from GB to Northern Ireland because it has been a lot of pain and cost. And we've yet to really see the tangible benefits of dual market access for Northern Ireland. So that's another area of work that we really want to see the government and the EU working in partnership on.
Antonella, it's an unusual situation the UK finds itself in. If you imagine it, it's juggling balls, several balls in the air, trying to keep the US happy, trying to keep the EU happy, trying to keep China happy. It's a fascinating period for the UK. Economically, can you manage to keep all of those players, all of those international players happy?
I think that is not unique. In the sense it is challenging, yes, it's difficult, yes, but it's not unique. And I think that what is emerging in here is that try to find the best possible outcome of your global supply chain, focusing on cost efficiency. It it is in the past, in the sense that cost efficiency and trying to find the source, being materials or labor from the cheapest location, the most competitive location, is no longer top of the priority, both for business and for policymaker, for government. What you need, it is resilience, it is something that you were touching on, control, your security. So trying to find a balance between remaining competitive in this evolving global market we are in, it is the real challenge. And in that sense, it is not unique to UK when it comes to the Brexit, because at the point it was about control, it was about gaining sovereignty back. And so it was that sense of cost efficiency. It is not top of the priority. However, the reality then kicks in when the cost of what you buy, it is doubling, it is increasing, it is hitting your pocket. So then you go from something that is ideal, it is emotional, it is something that you think you should manage differently, into something more real, more tangible. It is the power you have in your income.
I would say this UK-India deal that we've seen, Nichola, worth nearly £5 billion a year to the UK economy, cutting tariffs on a whole host of products, whiskey, medical tech and whatever. There is hope for greater trading alliances and greater openings up. Is that part of the answer here? When you're looking at the logistics sector for the UK, diversity, trading more widely.
Yes, I think it's a point that Antonella's making around resilient supply chains. And all of this has become part of the critical national picture now for governments. There's increase in geopolitical instability, and then we have this volatility around tariffs in the trading picture. So I think that governments need to be looking externally, looking to see where there is strategic trading partnerships, but also looking to see where there is that allied approach. So that, yes, there is globalization. I don't think it's the end of globalization, but I think what we are increasingly going to see is countries looking to allies to form kind of more strategic trading partnerships. But of course, the external picture is really important. And we always make the case to government when it's out negotiating free trade agreements and trade deals. Connectivity has to be a key part of that. Too often, it is an afterthought of, okay, so how will we get the goods to and from there effectively and efficiently? So we're saying make sure that that is a cornerstone of your negotiations. But of course, governments have a range of domestic levers as well, Mike. And we know that we're waiting on the industrial strategy from this government, from the infrastructure strategy, for the trade strategy. All of these strategies are forthcoming. We're saying to government, you have to recognize that the logistics sector is foundational to all of that. Literally, goods cannot move without logistics. There is no trade without logistics. So as well in having that external ambition, government needs to be ambitious in terms of dealing with the pinch points domestically that are hindering the logistics industry, because without it, it won't be able to unlock the trade growth ambitions that it has as a government or realise any of its other ambitions around that.
And when we talk of that role for government, Nichola, do you sense that state intervention is going to become one of the tools more often used?
I think so. I mean, if you look in the midst of all of this, when it started to kind of kick off, we had the Prime Minister, reverting to that build British, looking to this industrial strategy. So I do think that governments will be increasingly looking to domestic levers. The degree to which we see that very forceful state intervention, I think, is up for debate. But certainly, I think trade is very much more on the agenda of national governments than it has been for a while.
Antonella, I don't want to end this on a sour note, but we're almost wrapping up now. Are we on the brink of a global recession, do you think?
I hope not, and I believe I'm not the only one hoping that this will not materialize. But if it does, the pressure and the eyes will be on the stakeholders, on the people that enter in negotiation, finding a way to either shorten the length of the recession of this slowdown in the global trade, and finding a way to solve deals that are long lasting, so something that they can build on. They can create better relationship, better framework to deal with either trade or other subject that we are bringing in the conversation, like security or like making the supply chain more resilient. So in other terms, what I'm trying to say is the stakeholders have now an opportunity to improve rather than destroy what we have created so far.
And Nichola, your thoughts on that as a closing comment? I mean, it fascinates me that there is a former governor of the Bank of England now running Canada. There are some serious heads putting some serious thought into all of this on a global level.
There is, and I agree completely with Antonella. There's nothing like a recession or the threat of recession to focus minds. It's now all about relationships, as Antonella said, and it's up for governments and for industry to be working together so that we have that longer term plan that Antonella has spoken about, and so that we get to a better place as a result of all of this chaos and pain.
Nichola, Antonella, thank you very much for picking over the complexities of global trade right now. It's an ever-changing thing we're talking about. I look forward to being with you again with the next edition of Leading on Logistics, which is a Broadcast Revolution production for Logistics UK.